Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples Integrated Recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice and sugarcoating, no platitudes or bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. This one is probably overdue because I do a lot of work with families and addictions, and so today I wanted to talk about it being a family illness. It's often framed as an individual problem because there's one person that everything else revolves around. One person who drinks or uses drugs or maybe overuses their prescription medicine if they don't want to call it addiction. One person is quote unquote the issue, and that sounds like a clean story because it's emotionally convenient, and it suggests that the damage is contained in one body rather than across the entire system that is still functioning on the surface. But this framing does not hold up in real life. Addiction is not something that just one person does. It's something that the entire family system organizes around. It changes how decisions get made, what gets talked about out loud, what gets avoided, who carries what, who stays quiet, and while that substance use is active, the system doesn't wait for clarity. It adapts in real time. This is why the phrase family disease matters. It's not a metaphor, but it is a description of what is actually taking place. When addiction is active, the family system doesn't usually collapse. That's the part that people misunderstand. It adjusts. People compensate. Someone picks up slack. Someone monitors. Someone smooths things over. Someone absorbs the emotional volatility so that it doesn't spill everywhere. Someone pays the bills. Someone keeps the household functioning. And that is exactly how addiction survives. What looks like resilience from the outside is really distortion on the inside. The better that the family becomes at adapting, the less pressure there is on the person with addiction to change. Kids learn which mood is safe and which ones aren't. Partners learn which topics will escalate things and which ones will keep the peace. Parents learn how to be watchful but not to confront, or how to track behavior without naming it directly, and everyone learns how to manage the environment around the chaos. This doesn't take place because families are weak. It's because it's what nervous systems do if stability is unpredictable. Active addiction pushes families into survival mode, and survival mode rewards control, vigilance, silence, and overfunctioning. Over time, these behaviors stop feeling situational and start feeling like different personalities, like I'm the responsible one or the strong one, the one who doesn't rock the boat or the one that keeps the family together. And by the time that anyone says there is a problem here, the family is not just dealing with addiction, they're completely organized around it. So usually by this time I'm seeing some parents nodding heads or that I have their attention. And this is something that confuses families that are still living in the addiction. They have thoughts like, it's bad, but it's manageable, or we're getting through it. Or, well, it's not as bad as it used to be, it's improving. And maybe on one level that's true, that the system is managing. That doesn't mean that it's healthy. Active addiction creates a really interesting kind of chaotic stability where everyone knows their role. Everyone knows what to watch for or how to adjust. And the predictability of this pattern can actually feel safer than the uncertainty of disruption. This is why families often minimize what's happening even though they are exhausted by it. The system is working hard to prevent collapse, and collapse feels more dangerous than distortion. But functioning is not the same thing as healthy, and adaptation is not the same thing as resolution. In families dealing with active addiction, these roles don't form by accident. They form because they reduce immediate threat. Someone becomes the manager. Someone becomes the caretaker. Someone becomes the emotional buffer. Someone becomes the identified problem so that all those other people can stay intact. And these are not diagnostic labels, they're survival strategies. The problem isn't that families develop roles, it's the problem that the roles take over the system. They determine who gets to be tired, who gets to be angry, who gets to fall apart, and who isn't. And it sounds like if I stop managing, something bad will happen. If I remove them from the house, they'll be homeless or they might kill themselves. Or if I stop holding it together, then there's no backup plan. And of course, these fears make sense. And at the same time, it's also what's keeping that system locked in place. Active addiction does not just affect the person who is using. It teaches everyone else who they have to be in order for things not to get worse. This is where families in active addiction can get trapped, because what looks like you are helping often functions only as containment, managing behavior, covering or even avoiding consequences, softening impact, reducing volatility. All of it feels necessary because without it, it feels like things might blow up. And sometimes they do. But if the system absorbs the consequences of addiction, then addiction itself will always stay insulated. Pressure gets redistributed instead of resolved. Pain does not disappear, it just lands on the people who are trying to keep things together. This isn't about blame, it's mechanics, because pain is not cruelty, even though it might seem like it is. Pain is information. And if the information is consistently intercepted and absorbed by other people, then nothing is going to reorganize. People don't change because they understand something at an intellectual level. They don't change because someone else is suffering on their behalf. Change happens when the system stops buffering the impact of the behavior. Most families living with active addiction carry a few beliefs that are usually driving their behavior, like, if I did something different, then this wouldn't be happening, or if I am managing this correctly, then I can contain it. If I love them enough, they'll eventually come around. And of course, those beliefs can feel stabilizing because they offer a false sense of control. They collapse under scrutiny because you would hear in the program Al-Anon, you didn't cause the addiction, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. That doesn't mean that you are helpless, though. It means that your influence has limits, and pretending otherwise is part of what is keeping this system exhausted. Your responsibility isn't to manage another adult's behavior. It's for you to decide what you will and will not participate in, what you will and what you will not carry, how much of yourself you're willing to lose in the name of keeping the family okay and together. Recovery hasn't started yet if substance use is ongoing, because the system is already being written. Every accommodation, every silence, every rescue teaches the system what is acceptable and what's not. And that doesn't mean that families are doing something wrong. It's what any human would do under chronic stress. The problem is not whether the family is affected, it's how much of themselves they're going to give up if the pattern keeps going. So I'm going to move to talking about why allowing discomfort is not cruel and how over-helping functions in active addiction, what healthy boundaries look like before sobriety, not after. Because if families wait for the substance use to stop before changing anything else, then they often end up carrying that same system forward indefinitely, and a system like that cannot stay contained. There's a line that families in active addiction do not want to cross because it feels cruel. And the question usually sounds like some sort of version of, what happens if I stop helping and things get worse? What if he's homeless? What if he kills himself? This is where people freeze, understandably so, because they collapse several different things into one fear. They equate not rescuing with not caring. They equate boundaries with punishment. They equate discomfort with danger. So, they do what feels humane and ultimately ends up being destructive. They keep cushioning the fall because cushioning the fall lowers the immediate anxiety in the room, even if it quietly raises it long term. Rescuing works short term, and that's the problem, just like addiction. You step in, smooth things over, you make the call, you pay the bill, you lie to keep the peace, and the crisis momentarily de-escalates. The fighting stops, the panic settles, everybody can breathe, your nervous system learns a very simple lesson. If I intervene, the pain drops. What it doesn't register as cleanly is whose pain is being reduced. Mostly yours. Rescuing does not remove consequences, it just transfers them. The weight moves from the person whose behavior created the situation to the person now who's trying to manage it, and over time, that transfer does something corrosive to the system. It removes urgency from the person who needs it, and then it creates exhaustion and resentment for the people who don't. The addiction stays insulated, and the family burns out around it. People don't change because something finally gets explained clearly. They don't change because they love harder or understand more. They change when the avoidance stops working. Rescuing keeps avoidance functional. It keeps the system tolerable enough that nothing ever has to reorganize. And that brings us to the part that families resist the most, even if they intuitively sense that it's true. No one gets sober, stable, or accountable if it's easier to stay the same. There's a Tony Robbins quote that change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, or the perceived pain of change. That is how behavior actually shifts. As long as substances, denial, or chaos are still relieving pressure, even indirectly, then there is no internal reason to do anything different. Pain is the motivator, not shame, not lectures, not ultimatums, pain. And I hate seeing families in pain. I hate seeing clients in pain. I also know that it's like part of the foundation. If families are absorbing that pain for someone else, they block the only mechanism that reliably leads to change. This doesn't mean that you create suffering. It means that you actually stop preventing it. And there's a difference. That's where people get trapped. This is where the line between support and enabling gets blurry in real life. Because support isn't doing things for someone. Support is making it possible for someone to do the things that they need to do for themselves. That distinction sounds abstract until you have lived inside of it. Support sounds like staying honest, even if it's uncomfortable. Refusing to lie or cover up for somebody else. Being willing to help with treatment or a recovery-oriented step, but refusing to participate in any avoidance. It sounds like staying connected without financing or managing the addiction. Enabling looks similar on the surface, but the outcome is different. Paying rent with no conditions, covering for missed work, buying your kid their weed just because they're easier to be around if they're high, absorbing emotional explosions, cleaning up the same mess over and over and over again. The difference is not intention, it's trajectory. Does what you're doing move the system toward responsibility, or does it just make the current system sustainable for you? Money is where this becomes impossible to ignore. Families often try to avoid talking about money because it feels cold or transactional, but money is already shaping the system whether you want to name it or not. Unconditional financial support for adults who refuse accountability is not just generosity, it's sedation. You're removing all of the friction, and it's the reason that stasis is possible. It allows someone to avoid the impact of their choices indefinitely, and this is why boundaries around money often are the turning point. It's not meant to be punitive, it should be clarifying. Paying for treatment communicates one thing. Paying for avoidance communicates another. And the line between those two can feel brutal until you look honestly at what the alternative has been doing all along. This is where families raise the fear that they have been carrying for a long time. What if they spiral? What if they use more? What if they lose everything? What if something really bad happens? The uncomfortable reality is that those risks already exist. Buffering them does not eliminate danger. It just delays the reckoning. Because you don't control outcomes, you control your participation. Sometimes people do spiral when that system stops cushioning the impact. That doesn't mean that the boundary caused the spiral. It means that the boundary removed the illusion of stability of something that was already failing. Families often misattribute cause and effect at this point because they'll say something like, as soon as I stopped helping, everything fell apart. But what is more accurate is things were already falling apart. Someone was just holding it together long enough to keep it from actually being visible. Letting go in this context is not passivity, it's precision. It doesn't mean disappearing or being cold. It means stopping the reflex to overfunction. It means staying emotionally present without taking responsibility for outcomes. It means being direct instead of strategic, responding instead of managing, and telling the truth without trying to control how it lands. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without validating their behavior. You can stay connected without being entangled in their chaos. You can care without carrying. What makes this hard is not lack of love, it's the requirement to tolerate discomfort without immediately acting on that. Most rescuing isn't actually about the other person, it's about regulating your own anxiety. When you stop intervening, now you're left with helplessness, uncertainty, grief, and the reality that your influence had limits. That exposure is why it feels bad at first, not because it was wrong, but because it revealed what was never under your control to begin with. When one person in the system stops rescuing, the entire system reacts. You can expect anger, accusations, guilt, claims that you are being selfish, and, well, maybe, to some extent, that you're finally taking care of yourself. Systems resist differentiation. They prefer predictability over health, even when that predictability is painful. This is the point where a lot of families cave, right when the shift actually matters, because if a boundary is held long enough, one of two things tends to happen. Either the person adapts, or the relationship reorganizes around reality instead of illusion. Both outcomes are honest and stop the endless dysfunction. What this requires from families is not heroics or sacrifice or self-erasure. What it requires is clarity instead of chaos, boundaries instead of control, patience instead of urgency, and self-respect instead of martyrdom. Families don't heal by saving a person with addiction. They heal by stepping out of the patterns that have kept everyone locked into reaction. For this final section, I'm going to move into what happens over time when families stop organizing themselves around rescue, how roles soften without collapsing, and how relationships shift from survival-based arrangements to adult ones, even when the past doesn't get erased. This isn't optimism, it's realism, and when consistently applied, is stabilizing. Families often think that recovery means less chaos, and in the beginning that might be true. There could be fewer emergencies or blow-ups, nights spent waiting next to the phone, and that is an important shift, but only if it's the first marker. That's not the finish line. Real recovery doesn't just reduce the noise, it changes how people relate to one another while things are uncomfortable. And this is where a lot of families will stall if they don't have support or interventions, because calm feels like success until the same dynamics quietly rebuild themselves in a cleaner, quieter form. Because now the substance might be gone or reduced or contained, but the system is not. During active addiction, families are usually operating in survival mode. Everyone tracks everyone else, emotional boundaries are thin or non-existent, and one person's mood can set the tone for the entire environment. Decisions are often made based on risk management rather than honesty. That level of fusion feels normal when things are unstable, but it doesn't support healthy adult functioning. Recovery, when it actually starts to root, requires a different skill set. It requires differentiation. That's not emotional distance, but it's the ability to stay connected without being consumed, or to tolerate disagreement without trying to control the outcome, or to sit with somebody else's distress without trying to fix it, and making choices without explaining or justifying to the point of exhaustion. This is where relationships start to feel different and often exposed. When people stop performing their familiar roles, there's a period where no one is really sure what to do without them. The caretaker now doesn't know what to do with this empty space. The peacekeeper may become anxious or constantly in motion. And the person who was the problem feels raw without the buffering effect of chaos. This disorientation is not a setback, it's actually reorganization. And one of the least talked about parts of recovery is that it can feel lonely at first. When people stop overfunctioning, the system quiets down because there are fewer crises to rally around, fewer intense conversations in the middle of the night, less adrenaline holding everything together. And for families who are used to that kind of intensity, the quiet can feel like abandonment. This is where resentment can sometimes show up. People saying things like, "You're different now," or "You don't need me anymore," "You've changed." That reaction isn't wrong. It's pointing to the fact that the old form of closeness was built on management and urgency, not choice. Healthy systems don't require constant supervision to stay intact. They don't rely on one person holding everything together. They can tolerate a pause. They can survive tension. And they don't confuse intensity with connection. This is also where patterns like the 4 M's may start to loosen, not because somebody had an insight, but because behavior actually changed. Those M's are mothering, managing, manipulating, and martyrdom. And they dissolve through practice, not understanding. You notice your urge that you want to step in, but you pause. You don't intervene. You tolerate discomfort. Over time, the nervous system learns that not fixing doesn't automatically lead to disaster, that people can survive disappointment, and that relationships don't collapse just because you've stopped managing them. That's not detachment in a cold or indifferent sense. It's actually emotional adulthood. Trust, when it rebuilds, does so slowly and without any kind of a ceremony. A lot of families want a timeline. They ask how long it will take before everything starts to feel normal again or before trust can be restored. And there isn't a universal answer because trust is not rebuilt through words or reassurance. It's rebuilt through repeated exposure to a reality that doesn't fall apart. Boundaries get held, behavior stays aligned, and there's no grand gesture to reset the clock. Consistency does the work, and consistency is boring. It's also the reason why it works. Different family members move at different speeds. A partner might feel safer months after behavior stabilizes. A child might take years. That mismatch is not resistance, it's development happening on separate timelines. Eventually, and often without anyone announcing it, the past stops running every direction. Conversations can finally widen, people speak without scanning for exits, and futures can become discussable again. The history doesn't disappear, but it stops being in charge. This is what a healthier system looks like in practice. Conflict happens without turning into a catastrophe, closeness exists without enmeshment, and support doesn't require self-erasure. Love isn't used as leverage. It isn't perfect, it's stable. There is a line that people often mishear at this point. It's not your fault, and it is your work. Not being at fault doesn't mean that you're not responsible for what you do once you see the pattern clearly. You didn't cause the addiction. You didn't choose the environment that you adapted to. You didn't invent the roles that helped you survive. But now you are responsible for whether you will keep performing them now that you understand the cost. Recovery is not about assigning blame. It's about refusing to keep living inside of it. Families don't heal by waiting for the person with addiction to make everything right. They heal when each person reclaims their own agency and stops outsourcing it to the system. That's the part that nobody can do for you. If you're listening to this and you're recognizing yourself, the takeaway is not inspiration, it's orientation. Stop managing outcomes that are not yours. Learn to tolerate discomfort without immediately acting on it. Get support that focuses on your recovery rather than monitoring somebody else's behavior. Build boundaries that don't require anger to enforce. Let consistency do the work instead of intensity. This isn't cold, it's clean, and clean systems are where people actually have room to change. Addiction distorts love. It teaches families that control equals care and that suffering equals loyalty. But recovery teaches something harder. Connection without control, care without collapse, responsibility without rescue. There's no bumper sticker wisdom there. This isn't self-improvement language, it's adult functioning, and that is doing the work. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we are all capable of growing past them. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there, and in the meantime, Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.